Just put Grandma in the corner, Mom. No one will notice her there. Those words sliced through me like winter wind as I stood frozen in the doorway of my son's kitchen. My grandson Tyler hadn't seen me yet, too busy gesturing at seating charts, spread across the granite countertop. His fiancée Melissa looked uncomfortable, eyes darting between Tyler and my daughter-in-law Karen, who simply nodded as if they were discussing where to place a potted plant rather than a living, breathing person. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Me, Evelyn Harrison, 76 years old, and apparently now an inconvenience to be tucked away in some shadowy corner at my only grandson's wedding. I quietly stepped back, my hand gripping the doorframe for support. The organic pear cobbler I'd spent all morning baking, Tyler's favorite since childhood, suddenly felt heavy in my other hand. For 60 seconds, I debated between confrontation and retreat. I chose neither. Instead, I straightened my shoulders, took a steadying breath, and made a decision that would change everything about the upcoming wedding weekend and the relationships in our family forever. Autumn in New Hampshire had always been my favorite season. The maples along my driveway blazed in fiery glory as I pulled into my modest Cape Cod home, still clutching the steering wheel tightly even after turning off the engine. The cobbler sat untouched on the passenger seat, a reminder of my grandson's casual cruelty. I hadn't made my presence known in that kitchen. After overhearing Tyler's comment, I'd quietly left, placing the handwritten recipe card I'd planned, to give Melissa back in my purse. They never even knew I'd been there, though I'd been explicitly invited for what was supposed to be a special pre-wedding family lunch. Ridiculous, I muttered, finally exiting the car and heading inside where my calico cat Fitzgerald greeted me with concerned meows. "I'm fine, Fitz," I assured him, though the tremor in my voice suggested otherwise. As I prepared tea, my mind drifted back through the years. Tyler as a toddler, his pudgy hand gripping mine as we explored tide pools along the Maine coast. Tyler, at 8, proudly showing me his science fair volcano that we'd spent an entire weekend perfecting. Tyler at 16, coming to my house instead of going home after school, confiding his dreams while devouring my homemade cookies. When had I transformed from a cherished grandmother to embarrassing elderly obligation? The kitchen phone rang, startling me from my reverie. It was Karen, my daughter-in-law. "Evelyn? Where were you?" We waited nearly an hour. I hesitated. I wasn't feeling well. Migraine. The lie tasted bitter, but confronting her with what I'd overheard seemed potentially catastrophic with the wedding just 3 weeks away. "Oh, that's too bad." Tyler was disappointed. Her tone suggested mild inconvenience rather than genuine concern. "Listen, about the wedding seating." "Actually, Karen," I interrupted, surprising myself with my firmness, "I wanted to discuss that with you. I've been thinking about my role in the celebration." "Role? Oh, well, you'll be seated at table 16 with some of Daniel's cousins. They're quiet, so you should be comfortable." Table 16, not even with family, with strangers chosen for their quietness, as if I were some fragile artifact requiring a controlled environment. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "I was thinking of something more significant." "More significant?" Karen sounded confused, perhaps even alarmed. "Evelyn, everything's already arranged. The seating charts, the schedule, the photography timeline." "I understand, but I've had an idea I think Tyler and Melissa might appreciate." Inspiration was forming as I spoke, determination building with each word. "Would you put Tyler on the phone?" A muffled conversation followed before my grandson's voice came through. "Grandma, Mom said you weren't feeling well." "I'm better now," I said, surprising myself with how easily the half-truth flowed. "Tyler, do you remember when you were 10 and broke your arm falling from the oak tree in my backyard?" Sure." He sounded confused by this apparent non sequitur. You were terrified of the hospital, but I told you stories the entire time, from the car ride to the emergency room through the x-rays and casting. You said I should have been a writer instead of a high school English teacher. Yeah, I remember. His voice softened slightly with the memory. I've been thinking about your wedding, and I'd like to offer you something special, something unique that only I can give. Grandma, really, you don't need to. I'd like to write and perform an original poem for your ceremony, I continued, speaking over his protest. Something personal that captures your journey with Melissa. I've been taking that creative writing course at the community center, and this would be perfect for my final project. Silence stretched across the phone line, so complete I could practically hear Tyler's mental scramble for a polite refusal. That's really thoughtful, Grandma, but the ceremony is already planned down to the minute. The coordinator was very clear that it would only take 3 minutes, I insisted gently. 3 minutes to share wisdom from someone who's known you your entire life. Someone who's been married for 52 years before your grandfather passed. More silence followed by muffled consultation I couldn't quite make out. Then Melissa's voice came on the line. Mrs. Harrison? It's Melissa. That sounds like a beautiful idea. Tyler and I would be honored to have you read an original poem during the ceremony. I could almost picture Tyler's panicked expression beside her, but Melissa had always been the more emotionally intelligent of the pair. Perhaps she felt guilty about the corner comment, or maybe she genuinely appreciated the offer. Either way, I had my opening. Wonderful. I'll start working on it right away. It will be my gift to you both. After ending the call, I sat at my kitchen table staring out at the brilliant autumn foliage while Fitzgerald purred in my lap. What had I done? I hadn't written a poem since college, and now I'd committed to performing one at a wedding with 200 guests. But beneath my apprehension burned a steady flame of resolve. I wasn't going to be tucked away in a corner. I would stand before everyone and remind my grandson, and perhaps myself, of who I truly was. The next morning, I called my oldest friend, Martha Sullivan, and invited her for coffee. He said what? Martha exclaimed after I recounted the overheard kitchen conversation. Her silver bob shook with indignation. That boy needs his ears boxed. It's not entirely his fault, I sighed, though Tyler's words still stung. Karen and Daniel have always treated me like a fragile antique since Robert died. Tyler's just following their example. Martha snorted. Fragile? You, who backpacked through Europe at 70? Who still volunteers teaching literacy at the prison twice a week? Who makes the rest of us look positively lazy at our age? I smiled at her loyalty. Martha had known me since our college days at Wellesley, through marriage, motherhood, my 30-year teaching career, widowhood, and everything between. Well, regardless, I now need to write a poem that's meaningful without being embarrassing, personal without being invasive, and memorable without stealing attention from the couple. I rubbed my temples. Why didn't I offer to bake an extra cake instead? Because you're Evelyn Harrison, and you've never backed down from a challenge. Martha reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Besides, I have an idea that might help, with more than just the poem. Martha's idea was both simple and audacious. I would take the 3 weeks before the wedding to compile stories, photos, and memories highlighting my relationship with Tyler throughout his life, creating a visual and narrative journey that would inform my poem but serve an even greater purpose. If they want to put you in a corner, Martha said with fierce loyalty, then make sure everyone knows exactly who they're trying to hide. We spent the afternoon calling mutual friends and family members, asking for anecdotes and photos that featured Tyler and me together. My sister-in-law Judith mailed a DVD of Tyler's 8th birthday party, where I'd appeared dressed as a wizard to deliver his Harry Potter-themed cake. My former colleague Richard sent digital copies of newspaper clippings from when Tyler and I had been featured for our intergenerational community garden project. As material arrived daily, I sorted it chronologically in a large portfolio, while simultaneously drafting and redrafting my poem. What began as an impulsive act of defiance evolved into something more profound, a reckoning with my role in Tyler's life and a reflection on what it means to be forgotten by those we love most deeply. 2 weeks before the wedding, Karen called to check on my progress with the poem, her thinly veiled concern obvious. "Everything's fine," I assured her, though I would like to meet with Tyler and Melissa once more before the ceremony to make sure the tone is appropriate. "Well, they're extremely busy with final arrangements," she hedged. "I understand. Perhaps dinner at my house this Sunday. I could make Tyler's favorite beef stroganoff." The mention of his favorite childhood dish, one Karen had never mastered, despite my offering the recipe multiple times, seemed to soften her resistance. "I suppose that would work. Around 6? A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off." "Perfect," I replied, already planning the evening in my mind. Chatduri. Sunday arrived. I prepared not only the stroganoff, but also a carefully orchestrated display of memorabilia in my rarely used formal living room. Photo albums lay strategically open on the coffee table. A digital picture frame cycled through carefully selected images. My teaching awards and community recognition certificates, normally tucked away in a drawer, were arranged on the mantel, alongside photos of Tyler at various ages. I wasn't being subtle, but I was determined to remind my grandson of our shared history before confronting him about his hurtful words. Tyler arrived first, alone. "Melissa and Mom will be here soon," he explained with an awkward hug. "Melissa wanted to pick up something for you, and Mom's driving." "Perfect. A chance for private conversation." "Come help me in the kitchen," I suggested, leading him through the house. I noticed his eyes lingering on the unusually prominent displays of family history, but said nothing. As he sampled the stroganoff sauce, just as he'd done since childhood, I asked casually, "Are you nervous about the wedding?" He shrugged, trying to project nonchalance. "Everything's under control. Melissa's got spreadsheets for her spreadsheets." "That's not what I asked." Tyler looked up, meeting my eyes properly for the first time since arriving. At 28, he still had moments where he resembled the sensitive boy I'd known before adulthood and career ambitions had reshaped him. "Yeah, I guess I am nervous," he admitted. "It's just, there's so much pressure for everything to be perfect. Melissa's family is, well, they're pretty high society. Her dad's a federal judge. Her mom chairs 3 different charity boards. The wedding has to impress them. And that's why you wanted to put me in the corner? So, I wouldn't embarrass you in front of Melissa's important family?" The wooden spoon Tyler had been holding clattered against the stovetop. His face drained of color. "What? I never—" "3 weeks ago, I came to your house for lunch. I arrived early with a cobbler and heard your conversation with your mother and Melissa about seating arrangements." I kept my voice level, determined not to show how deeply his words had wounded me. "Grandma, I didn't mean—" "Please don't insult me by denying what I heard with my own ears, Tyler." I turned down the heat under the stroganoff. "What I'd like to understand is when I transformed from your grandmother, who taught you to ride a bike, helped you apply to colleges, and attended every school play, into an embarrassing elderly relative to be hidden away." Tyler's shoulders slumped as he sank onto a kitchen stool. "It wasn't about you being embarrassing," he said quietly. "It was about you being alone." "Excuse me?" "All the tables are arranged for couples or immediate family groups. You would have been the only solo person at our family table. And Mom thought, she said it would just highlight that Grandpa isn't here anymore. That it might make you sad to be surrounded by couples." I blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by this unexpected explanation. "So your solution was to place me with strangers at table 16 rather than with my own family?" Tyler winced. "When you put it that way, it sounds terrible." Because it is terrible, Tyler. And what's worse is that no one thought to ask what I might prefer. The front door opened, heralding Karen and Melissa's arrival. Tyler looked panicked, clearly wanting to continue our conversation privately. "We'll talk more later," I promised, patting his hand. "But right now, I want you to think about something. Being alone at a table is nothing compared to being alone in life. I've been managing quite well since your grandfather died 6 years ago. I don't need protection from reminders that I'm a widow." Throughout dinner, an undercurrent of tension flowed beneath the polite conversation. Karen repeatedly tried to steer the discussion toward wedding logistics, while I deliberately redirected to stories from Tyler's childhood. Melissa, to her credit, seemed genuinely interested in these glimpses of her fiancé's early years. "I had no idea you were a state spelling bee champion," she said to Tyler after I recounted coaching him through months of preparation. "5th grade," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. "Grandma made vocabulary flashcards we practiced every day after school." Tyler stayed with me quite often while Karen and Daniel were establishing their careers, I explained. "We became quite the team." "I knew. You were close, but these stories..." Melissa gestured to the photo albums we'd moved to the dining room table for dessert. "You've had such a significant influence on the man I'm marrying." "That's very kind of you to say," I replied, serving the apple crumble I'd made for dessert, another of Tyler's favorites. "Speaking of influence," Karen interjected, "about this poem for the ceremony, Evelyn. We should probably discuss parameters." "Actually," Tyler interrupted, setting down his dessert spoon with unusual firmness, "I think we should trust Grandma completely. She knows me better than almost anyone." He finally met my eyes, a silent apology in his gaze. "Whatever she writes will be perfect." Karen looked startled by her son's sudden change in attitude, but before she could respond, Melissa brightened with an idea. "Mrs. Harrison, would you consider doing something more than just the poem? The wedding coordinator mentioned we never finalized who would provide the wisdom moment during the ceremony." "Wisdom moment," I echoed. "It's a short reflection on marriage from someone with experience," Melissa explained. "Usually given by a long-married relative or mentor. We hadn't chosen anyone because most of our older relatives are divorced," Tyler finished wryly. "Not the best advertisements for matrimonial wisdom." "But you were married for, what was it, over 50 years?" Melissa continued. "That's exactly the perspective we need." I noticed Karen's tightening expression but focused on Melissa's genuine enthusiasm. "I'd be honored, though I'm hardly an expert. Your grandfather and I had our struggles like any couple." "That's actually perfect," Melissa insisted. "Real wisdom comes from overcoming difficulties, not from pretending they don't exist." By evening's end, my role in the wedding had expanded from hidden table 16 occupant to ceremony participant with 2 distinct contributions. As they prepared to leave, Tyler hung back, letting Karen and Melissa go ahead to the car. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "You deserved better from me." "Yes, I did," I agreed, neither absolving him instantly nor holding on to bitterness. "But I understand wedding stress can bring out the worst in people." He hugged me then, a real embrace like when he was younger. "The poem and wisdom moment will be amazing. No one could do it better." After they left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the evidence of our shared history, wondering if I'd made progress or simply set myself up for greater anxiety. The wedding was now less than 2 weeks away, and I'd taken on significant responsibility in a ceremony that would be attended by judges, politicians, and business leaders from Melissa's social circle. The next morning, I called Martha again. "Ty, need your help with more than just a poem," I told her. "I need to become unforgettable." Martha arrived an hour later with a gleam in her eye and her iPad full of ideas. "If you're going to stand up in front of Boston's elite and share your wisdom," she declared, "then you're going to look absolutely fabulous doing it." What followed was 10 days of intensive preparation. Martha's niece Stephanie, who owned a boutique in Portsmouth, helped me select an outfit that managed to be both appropriate for a grandmother of the groom and striking enough to command attention. A tailored sapphire blue dress with a matching jacquard jacket that highlighted my still good posture and silver hair. My regular hairdresser Michael designed a more contemporary style that took years off my appearance without trying too hard. The local theater group's vocal coach, a former student of mine, spent hours helping me practice projection and timing for public speaking. Meanwhile, I continued refining both my poem and wisdom reflection, drawing upon the stories and images I'd collected. The task forced me to distill decades of experience into meaningful guidance without resorting to cliches or sentimentality. Through it all ran a powerful current of determination. I wasn't preparing merely to avoid embarrassment or even to impress Melissa's family. I was reclaiming my identity and refusing to be diminished by age or circumstance. 3 days before the wedding, I received an unexpected call from Melissa. "Mrs. Harrison? I was wondering if I could stop by this afternoon." "Alone," she added, as if anticipating my question about Tyler. She arrived looking slightly nervous, clutching a gift bag. "Is everything all right?" I asked, ushering her into the living room where evidence of my wedding preparation was scattered across every surface. "Everything's fine with the wedding," she assured me. "This is more personal." She hesitated before continuing. "Tyler told me what happened, about overhearing his comment about seating you in the corner. I wanted you to know I never agreed with that plan." "I noticed your discomfort at that moment," I acknowledged. She nodded, relieved by my understanding. "My own grandmother raised me while my parents worked international assignments. She died my first year of law school, and I'd give anything to have her at our wedding." Her voice wavered slightly. "When I heard how Tyler and Karen were treating you, it upset me deeply. But I was trying to navigate family dynamics without causing conflict. That's understandable. Marrying into a family can be complicated." "Yes, but that's no excuse for not speaking up." She handed me the gift bag. "This is a small token of appreciation for everything you've done for Tyler, and for agreeing to participate in our ceremony despite how thoughtlessly you were treated." Inside was a beautiful silver-framed photograph of Tyler and me from his high school graduation, professionally restored and enhanced. My eyes welled with unexpected tears. "Found it while helping Tyler clean out his apartment before our move," Melissa explained. "It seemed important to him, but he had it shoved in a drawer. I thought it deserved better." "Thank you," I said simply, touched by her thoughtfulness. Melissa leaned forward earnestly. "Mrs. Harrison, I want you to know that after the wedding, I hope we can build our own relationship. Tyler's told me so many stories about how you shaped his childhood. I'd like to know that woman for myself." As she left, I felt a weight lifting from my heart. Whatever happened at the wedding, I had an ally in Tyler's new wife, and perhaps a path toward healing the distance that had grown between my grandson and me. The night before the wedding, I stood before my bedroom mirror, rehearsing my poem and wisdom reflection one final time. Fitzgerald watched from the bed with feline indifference as I gestured and modulated my voice according to my vocal coach's instructions. "Tomorrow, Fitz," I told the unimpressed cat, "Grandma steps out of the corner and into the spotlight." What I didn't yet realize was just how significant that spotlight would become, or how completely it would transform our family's future. The morning of Tyler and Melissa's wedding dawned with picture-perfect October brilliance. Sunlight streamed through crimson and gold leaves, casting dappled patterns across my bedroom floor as I awakened earlier than necessary, my stomach fluttering with anticipation. Today was the day I'd either reconnect meaningfully with my grandson or potentially damage our relationship beyond repair. "No pressure, Evelyn," I muttered to myself as I brewed extra strong coffee. Martha arrived at 9, as promised, carrying a professional makeup kit borrowed from her granddaughter who worked in television. You look terrified, she observed, setting down her bags in my kitchen. Having second thoughts? Second, third, and fourth, I admitted. What if I make a fool of myself? What if I forget the words? What if you're brilliant and remind everyone, including that grandson of yours, exactly who Evelyn Harrison is? Martha countered, squeezing my shoulder. Now drink your coffee. We have 3 hours to transform you into the unforgettable grandmother of the groom. The wedding was being held at the Riverside Estate, a tastefully restored 19th-century mansion overlooking the Merrimack River. The ceremony would take place in the formal gardens at 2 o'clock, followed by a reception in the grand ballroom. As a participant in the ceremony, I was expected to arrive by noon for the pre-wedding photographs and final coordination with the wedding planner. By 11:30, I barely recognized the woman in my full-length mirror. My silver hair had been styled in an elegant updo that framed my face perfectly. Martha's granddaughter's makeup techniques had enhanced my features without looking overdone. The sapphire blue ensemble we'd chosen complemented my eyes and gave me a regal bearing that belied my anxiety. "You look magnificent," Martha declared, adjusting the tasteful silver and sapphire necklace she'd insisted on lending me. "Tyler won't know what hit him." "It's not about shocking Tyler," I reminded her, though I couldn't deny a flutter of satisfaction at the thought. "It's about reclaiming my place in his life. In my family's life." Martha's expression softened. "I know, Evelyn, but a little shock value never hurts." We arrived at Riverside Estate precisely at noon. The grounds bustled with activity as florists arranged last-minute displays and catering staff prepared for the reception. I clutched my portfolio containing both the poem and wisdom reflection, taking deep breaths to steady my nerves. A harried young woman with a clipboard and headset approached us at the entrance. "Mrs. Harrison? I'm Whitney, the wedding coordinator. We've been expecting you." She assessed my appearance with a quick professional glance, and I was gratified to see approval rather than dismay in her expression. "You look lovely. Let me take you to the bridal suite where the family is gathering for pre-ceremony photos." Martha squeezed my hand. "I'll find my seat. Remember, shoulders back, chin up." "As if I could forget after you've reminded me 50 times, I replied with a nervous smile. Following Whitney through the mansion's elegant hallways, I mentally rehearsed my opening lines once more. The coordinator paused outside an ornate door, knocking briefly before ushering me inside. The spacious suite buzzed with pre-wedding energy. Melissa sat at a vanity in her undergarments while a stylist worked on her hair. Her mother supervised nearby, elegant in pale gold. 3 bridesmaids in varying stages of preparation fluttered around the room. And Karen, my daughter-in-law, stood adjusting my son Daniel's boutonniere, both already fully dressed for the ceremony. Conversation halted as I entered. Karen's eyes widened, her hands freezing mid-adjustment. "Mom?" Daniel stepped forward, genuine surprise in his voice. "You look different," I suggested with a smile. "Stunning," he finished, embracing me warmly. My son had always been caught between his wife's controlling nature and his own natural affection for me. Today, affection was winning. "Evelyn," Karen managed, recovering her composure. "That's certainly a statement outfit." Before I could respond, Melissa sprang from her chair, drawing her makeup artist's protests as she hurried toward me in her silk robe. "Mrs. Harrison, you look absolutely incredible." Her enthusiasm was unfeigned as she took both my hands in hers. "I'm so glad you're here early. The photographer wants to do some 3-generation photos once I'm dressed." "3-generation?" I echoed. "You, Tyler, and me," she explained. "Tyler said you're as much his parent as his actual parents in many ways, so we should honor that." I blinked back sudden tears, careful not to ruin my expertly applied makeup. "That's very thoughtful." "Is everything all right?" I asked, ushering her into the living room where evidence of my wedding preparation was scattered across every surface. "Everything's fine with the wedding," she assured me. "This is more personal." She hesitated before continuing. "Tyler told me what happened, about overhearing his comment about seating you in the corner. I wanted you to know I never agreed with that plan." "I noticed your discomfort at that moment," I acknowledged. She nodded, relieved by my understanding. My own grandmother raised me while my parents worked international assignments. She died my first year of law school, and I'd give anything to have her at our wedding. Her voice wavered slightly. "When I heard how Tyler and Karen were treating you, it upset me deeply, but I was trying to navigate family dynamics without causing conflict." "That's understandable. Marrying into a family can be complicated." "Yes, but that's no excuse for not speaking up." She handed me the gift bag. "This is a small token of appreciation for everything you've done for Tyler, and for agreeing to participate in our ceremony despite how thoughtlessly you were treated." Inside was a beautiful silver-framed photograph of Tyler and me from his high school graduation, professionally restored and enhanced. My eyes welled with unexpected tears. "Found it while helping Tyler clean out his apartment before our move," Melissa explained. "It seemed important to him, but he had it shoved in a drawer. I thought it deserved better." "Thank you," I said simply, touched by her thoughtfulness. Melissa leaned forward earnestly. "Mrs. Harrison, I want you to know that after the wedding, I hope we can build our own relationship. Tyler's told me so many stories about how you shaped his childhood. I'd like to know that woman for myself." As she left, I felt a weight lifting from my heart. Whatever happened at the wedding, I had an ally in Tyler's new wife, and perhaps a path toward healing the distance that had grown between my grandson and me. The night before the wedding, I stood before my bedroom mirror, rehearsing my poem and wisdom reflection one final time. Fitzgerald watched from the bed with feline indifference as I gestured and modulated my voice according to my vocal coach's instructions. "Tomorrow, Fitz," I told the unimpressed cat, "Grandma steps out of the corner and into the spotlight." What I didn't yet realize was just how significant that spotlight would become, or how completely it would transform our family's future. The morning of Tyler and Melissa's wedding dawned with picture-perfect October brilliance. Sunlight streamed through crimson and gold leaves, casting dappled patterns across my bedroom floor as I awakened earlier than necessary, my stomach fluttering with anticipation. Today was the day I'd either reconnect meaningfully with my grandson or potentially damage our relationship beyond repair. "No pressure, Evelyn," I muttered to myself as I brewed extra strong coffee. Martha arrived at 9, as promised, carrying a professional makeup kit borrowed from her granddaughter who worked in television. "You look terrified," she observed, setting down her bags in my kitchen. "Having second thoughts?" "Second, third, and fourth," I admitted. "What if I make a fool of myself? What if I forget the words? What if you're brilliant and remind everyone, including that grandson of yours, exactly who Evelyn Harrison is?" Martha countered, squeezing my shoulder. "Now drink your coffee. We have 3 hours to transform you into the unforgettable grandmother of the groom." The wedding was being held at the Riverside Estate, a tastefully restored 19th-century mansion overlooking the Merrimack River. The ceremony would take place in the formal gardens at 2 o'clock, followed by a reception in the grand ballroom. As a participant in the ceremony, I was expected to arrive by noon for the pre-wedding photographs and final coordination with the wedding planner. By 11:30, I barely recognized the woman in my full-length mirror. My silver hair had been styled in an elegant updo that framed my face perfectly. Martha's granddaughter's makeup techniques had enhanced my features without looking overdone. The sapphire blue ensemble we'd chosen complemented my eyes and gave me a regal bearing that belied my anxiety. "You look magnificent," Martha declared, adjusting the tasteful silver and sapphire necklace she'd insisted on lending me. "Tyler won't know what hit him." It's not about shocking Tyler, I reminded her, though I couldn't deny a flutter of satisfaction at the thought. It's about reclaiming my place in his life, in my family's life. Martha's expression softened. I know, Evelyn, but a little shock value never hurts. We arrived at Riverside Estate precisely at noon. The grounds bustled with activity as florists arranged last-minute displays and catering staff prepared for the reception. I clutched my portfolio containing both the poem and wisdom reflection, taking deep breaths to steady my nerves. A harried, young woman with a clipboard and headset approached us at the entrance. Mrs. Harrison, I'm Whitney, the wedding coordinator. We've been expecting you. She assessed my appearance with a quick professional glance, and I was gratified to see approval rather than dismay in her expression. You look lovely. Let me take you to the bridal suite where the family is gathering for pre-ceremony photos. Martha squeezed my hand. I'll find my seat. Remember, shoulders back, chin up. As if I could forget after you've reminded me 50 times, I replied with a nervous smile. Following Whitney through the mansion's elegant hallways, I mentally rehearsed my opening lines once more. The coordinator paused outside an ornate door, knocking briefly before ushering me inside. The spacious suite buzzed with pre-wedding energy. Melissa sat at a vanity in her undergarments while a stylist worked on her hair. Her mother supervised nearby, elegant in pale gold. 3 bridesmaids in varying stages of preparation fluttered around the room, and Karen, my daughter-in-law, stood adjusting my son Daniel's boutonniere, both already fully dressed for the ceremony. Conversation halted as I entered. Karen's eyes widened, her hands freezing mid-adjustment. Mom? Daniel stepped forward, genuine surprise in his voice. You look different, I suggested with a smile. Stunning, he finished, embracing me warmly. My son had always been caught between his wife's controlling nature and his own natural affection for me. Today, affection was winning. Evelyn, Karen managed, recovering her composure. That's certainly a statement outfit. Before I could respond, Melissa sprang from her chair, drawing her makeup artist's protests as she hurried toward me in her silk robe. Mrs. Harrison, you look absolutely incredible. Her enthusiasm was unfeigned as she took both my hands in hers. I'm so glad you're here early. The photographer wants to do some 3-generation photos once I'm dressed. 3-generation? I echoed. You, Tyler, and me, she explained. Tyler said you're as much his parent as his actual parents in many ways, so we should honor that. I blinked back sudden tears, careful not to ruin my expertly applied makeup. That's very thoughtful. Karen's tight smile suggested this hadn't been her idea, but she said nothing as she busied herself rearranging Daniel's pocket square. Where is Tyler? I asked, noticing my grandson's absence. Groomsman's suite down the hall, Daniel explained. Traditional superstition. Groom can't see bride before the ceremony. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of activity. Once Melissa was fully dressed, a vision in classic ivory lace, the photographer arranged a series of portraits. True to be her word, Melissa insisted on several featuring just her, Tyler, and me, compositions that highlighted our connection while subtly emphasizing my role in his life. Throughout it all, I watched Karen's reactions carefully. Her tight smile never wavered, but I caught glimpses of genuine surprise when Tyler treated me with particular deference, pulling out my chair and asking repeatedly if I was comfortable. Whatever conversation they'd had after our Sunday dinner had clearly affected him. As ceremony time approached, Whitney gathered all participants for final instructions. We stood in an antechamber adjacent to the garden where guests were already being seated. Mrs. Harrison, she said, consulting her clipboard. You'll be seated in the front row initially, after the couple's vows but before the ring exchange. Reverend Michaels will introduce you for both the wisdom moment and the special poem. You'll use the central microphone. She gestured to the garden setup visible through the window. Any questions? No, I'm clear, I replied. working to keep my voice steady despite mounting nerves. Through the window, I could see the assembled guests, at least 200 people filling the white garden chairs. Melissa's family occupied the first several, rows on the left side, exuding affluence and social standing in their designer attire. Our more modest family contingent sat to the right, and there, at the end of the third row, I spotted Martha giving me an encouraging thumbs up. The processional music began, a string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon. The wedding party departed. In carefully timed intervals, Karen and Daniel among the last to be escorted to their seats before Tyler took his position at the altar with his best man. I followed the mother of the bride to the front row, acutely aware of the curious glances from guests who clearly wondered about the striking older woman in sapphire blue. The ceremony proceeded beautifully through the initial welcome, readings, and exchange of vows. Tyler and Melissa gazed at each other with such obvious affection that I felt my earlier resentment softening. Whatever my grandson's failings and how he'd treated me, his love for his bride was genuine and touching. Then came the moment I'd been preparing for. Before the exchange of rings, Reverend Michaels announced, Tyler and Melissa have asked for a special wisdom moment from someone who has experienced the joys and challenges of a long marriage. Mrs. Evelyn Harrison, grandmother of the groom, will share both her wisdom and a special poem she has written for the couple. A murmur of interest rippled through the assembled guests as I rose from my seat, straightening to my full height despite the nervous trembling in my knees. The walk to the central microphone felt interminable, but I forced myself to move deliberately, making eye contact with Martha for courage before turning to face the gathered assembly. "Thank you, Reverend Michaels," I began, my voice stronger than I'd expected. "For those who don't know me, I'm Tyler's grandmother. I was married to Robert Harrison for 52 years before his passing, though that bare statistic tells you little about the true nature of marriage." I glanced at Tyler and Melissa, standing together at the side of the altar area. Tyler's expression showed nervous anticipation, while Melissa offered an encouraging smile. "Marriage," I continued, "is not the romantic culmination you see in films, but rather the beginning of a complex, challenging, and ultimately rewarding journey. It is choosing each other daily, even when, especially when, that choice is difficult." Unfolded my prepared notes but found I didn't need them. The words I'd rehearsed flowed naturally, drawn from decades of lived experience. My late husband once told me that the secret to our marriage was that we never fell out of love at the same time. This drew appreciative chuckles from the audience. "There will be days when one of you carries the relationship while the other struggles. The magic happens when you alternate this role seamlessly, sometimes hourly." As I spoke, I noticed Melissa's father nodding thoughtfully, his earlier skeptical expression softening. Several older couples in the audience exchanged knowing glances or squeezed hands. But perhaps the most important wisdom I can offer is this. In marriage, as in life, no one should be relegated to the corner. I paused deliberately, meeting Tyler's, gazed directly for the first time. His face flushed with recognition of my reference. Every person deserves to be centered in their own story and valued for their full humanity, regardless of age, circumstance, or the convenience of others. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her front row seat, but I continued without acknowledging her discomfort. "Tyler, from the moment you were born, I have watched you grow into a man of compassion, intelligence, and integrity. Melissa, in our brief acquaintance, I've come to admire your kindness, your strength, and your clear-sightedness. Together, you have the foundation for a partnership that will weather whatever comes." I set aside my notes entirely now, holding up the portfolio containing the photographs and mementos I'd collected. Which brings me to the poem I've written for you both. It's called Corners and Centers. The garden fell completely silent as I began to recite the poem I'd labored over for weeks. It traced Tyler's life journey through the lens of our relationship, acknowledging the special bond we'd shared during his formative years while connecting those experiences to the values I saw him sharing with Melissa. Throughout, I wove the metaphor of corners and centers, how life constantly shifts our perspective, moving us between prominence and obscurity, teaching us to value each position for its unique vantage point. As I concluded, I saw something unexpected. Tears streaming unashamedly down Tyler's face. Melissa reached for his hand, squeezing it supportively as he struggled to compose himself. "May you both," I finished softly, "find the courage to step from comfortable corners into challenging centers, knowing that true growth happens only when we risk being fully seen." Applause erupted. Not the polite, obligatory kind typical of wedding ceremony moments, but genuine, enthusiastic appreciation. From my peripheral vision, I noticed several guests dabbing at eyes, including, surprisingly, Melissa's formidable-looking father. As I moved to return to my seat, Tyler stepped forward suddenly, breaking from the formal ceremony choreography. He embraced me tightly, publicly. "I'm so sorry, Grandma," he whispered against my ear. "You've never belonged in any corner." "I know that, dear," I replied quietly. "I just needed to remind you." The remainder of the ceremony proceeded according to plan, but something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere. As Tyler and Melissa exchanged rings and were pronounced husband and wife, I felt a weight lifting from my heart. The distance that had grown between my grandson and me hadn't been bridged completely, but the first steps had been taken. During the reception that followed, I found myself the unexpected center of attention. Guests approached continuously, complimenting both my appearance and my ceremony contribution. Melissa's father, Judge Andrew Patterson, engaged me in a lengthy conversation about my teaching career and volunteer work. "My mother was a high school English teacher in Connecticut," he revealed, surprising me with this personal connection. "She similarly refused to be marginalized as she aged. I recognized her spirit in your words today." Even when Karen approached, during the dinner service, her expression was more thoughtful than I'd seen in years. "That was quite moving, Evelyn," she admitted, settling into the empty chair beside me. For once, I wasn't seated at a distant table but prominently placed with immediate family. Tyler was deeply affected. "That was my hope," I replied neutrally. She twisted her napkin unconsciously. "Perhaps I've been overprotective of how Tyler perceives you. After Daniel's father died, I worried about me reminding everyone of mortality, of aging, of loss," I suggested gently when she faltered. Karen nodded reluctantly. It seemed easier to create distance than to address grief directly. "Easier for whom?" I asked, without accusation. She had no answer for that, but something in her expression suggested my question had landed. Before our conversation could continue, the best man called for attention for the traditional toasts and speeches. As I sipped champagne and listened to heartfelt tributes to the newlyweds, Martha slipped into the seat Karen had vacated. "You," she whispered fiercely, "were magnificent. I've never been prouder to be your friend." "Was it too much?" I asked, still uncertain despite the positive reception. The reference to corners was rather pointed. "It was exactly enough," Martha assured me. Dignified, but unmistakable. "You reclaimed your place without embarrassing anyone, the perfect response to being sidelined." Later, during the dancing portion of the evening, Tyler sought me out specifically, leading me onto the dance floor for a song. "I've been thinking about everything you said, Grandma," he began as we moved to the music, "about not relegating people to corners, about valuing each person's full humanity." "Good thoughts to carry into marriage," I observed. "Yes, but it's more than that." His expression grew serious. "When Dad and Mom were building their careers, you were my center. You were the one constant I could count on. Somewhere along the way, I stopped acknowledging that. Stopped acknowledging you. People grow up, Tyler. Relationships change. That's natural. Change, yes. Discard, no. He guided me through a gentle turn. Melissa and I have been talking. After the honeymoon, we'd like to start a tradition of Sunday dinners at your house once a month. If you're willing. The simple gesture, acknowledging my home as a place of connection rather than an obligation to visit occasionally, meant more than any elaborate apology. I'd like that very much, I said, blinking back tears for the second time that day. And, he added with a hint of his boyhood mischief, we should probably discuss your role as future great-grandmother. Melissa and I are thinking about starting a family within a year. I laughed, genuinely delighted by both the news and his assumption that I would be centrally involved. I still have all your favorite children's books in the attic, and I believe I remember how to make those animal-shaped pancakes you loved. As the dance ended, I noticed Melissa's parents watching us with approving smiles. Somewhere during the day, I had transformed in their eyes from an elderly relative to be politely acknowledged into a person of substance and character. Martha was waiting at our table when I returned, looking smug. Don't say I told you so, I warned, sinking gratefully into my chair. I wouldn't dream of it, she replied innocently, though I did tell you so. We both laughed, watching as Tyler rejoined Melissa on the dance floor, the two of them moving together with the synchronicity of true partners. You know, Martha observed, for someone who was supposed to be hidden in a corner, you've managed to become the second most important person at this wedding. That wasn't my intention, I protested, though not very convincingly. Wasn't it? Martha raised an eyebrow. Even a little? I considered the question honestly. Perhaps partly, but mostly I wanted Tyler to see me again, really see me. Not as an obligation or a relic, but as the grandmother who helped shape him. Mission emphatically accomplished, Martha declared, raising her champagne glass in a private toast. To Evelyn Harrison, who reminded everyone that wisdom doesn't diminish with age, and that the most powerful place in any room isn't the corner, but the center you claim for yourself. As evening deepened and stars appeared above the estate's gardens, I watched my family with new clarity. The distance I'd felt had been partly their creation, but also partly mine, my resignation to the role they'd assigned me. Today's perfect response hadn't been just about proving them wrong, but about reminding myself who I truly was. No one would be putting this grandmother in a corner again, at this wedding or anywhere else. 6 months after Tyler and Melissa's wedding, spring. Blossoms adorned my front yard as I prepared for the now-established monthly Sunday dinner. The tradition Tyler had proposed during our dance had become a cherished ritual, expanding beyond just Tyler and Melissa to include my son Daniel and, surprisingly, even Karen, whose attitude toward me had undergone a subtle but significant transformation since the wedding. Need any help with that roast, Mom? Daniel asked, entering my kitchen with a bottle of wine. He had arrived early, as had become his habit lately, affording us rare one-on-one time before the others appeared. I've been cooking roasts since before you were born, I reminded him, but smiled to soften the words. Though you could set the dining room table, I've put out the good china. As Daniel arranged plates and silverware, I reflected on the unexpected ripple effects of my perfect response at the wedding. What had begun as a personal stand against being marginalized had catalyzed subtle shifts throughout our family dynamic. Daniel had gradually reclaimed the warmer relationship we'd shared before Karen's influence had created distance. Now in his 50s, my son seemed to be reassessing priorities as he entered the later phase of his career as a corporate attorney. Mom? He began, the slight hesitation in his voice alerting me that something significant was coming. I've been meaning to ask you something. That sounds ominous, I replied lightly, checking the vegetables roasting alongside the beef. Not ominous, just important. He leaned against the counter, looking boyish despite his graying temples. I'm considering retirement next year. This was unexpected. You're only 54. I thought you had your sights set on managing a partner. He shrugged. That was the plan. But lately, I've been thinking about what you said at the wedding, about no one belonging in a corner. I realized I've put myself in one professionally. 80-hour weeks, constantly available to clients, missing so much of Tyler's childhood. And now you're reconsidering? Karen and I have been discussing options. We could downsize, move somewhere, quieter. Maybe I could teach law part-time or do pro bono work that actually matters. He hesitated again. I guess what I'm asking is, was it worth it? Your choice to teach high school English instead of pursuing that PhD you once mentioned? Choosing balance over advancement? The question touched me deeply. Daniel rarely sought my advice on life decisions, especially after establishing his high-powered career path that contrasted sharply with my more modest professional choices. For me, absolutely, I answered honestly. I never regretted prioritizing family and community over career prestige. But Daniel, that was my choice. Yours might be different. I'm not sure it is, he admitted. Watching you these past months, how connected you are to your former students, your volunteer work, your friends like Martha, it's made me realize what I've sacrificed for professional success. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of Tyler and Melissa. The conversation shifted as they entered bearing a homemade dessert and excited news about the historic home they were purchasing, one conveniently located, just 10 minutes from my house. Later, as we gathered around my dining room table, I observed my expanding family with quiet satisfaction. Melissa was now clearly showing her pregnancy, her hand occasionally resting on her growing belly. Tyler had matured noticeably in the month since his wedding, his new role as restoration project manager at a prestigious architectural firm bringing out leadership qualities that reminded me of his grandfather. Before we start, Tyler announced, raising his water glass, I'd like to propose a toast to Grandma, whose Sunday dinners have become the highlight of our month. To Grandma, the others echoed, raising their glasses. And, Tyler continued, exchanging glances with Melissa, we have a small announcement. We've decided on a name for the baby. All attention turned to the expectant parents. They'd previously revealed they were having a girl, but had been undecided. About names. If it's all right with everyone, Melissa said, her eyes finding mine, we'd like to name her Evelyn Rose, after her great-grandmother. Unexpected emotion constricted my throat. Naming traditions had always followed Karen's family in the past. Tyler himself had been named after Karen's father. I would be honored, I managed finally, blinking back tears. Karen, to my surprise, reached over to squeeze my hand. It's a beautiful choice, she said with genuine warmth that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. As dinner progressed, conversation flowed naturally between family updates and broader topics. When the subject turned to my recent volunteer activities, I mentioned the community memoir writing workshop I'd been leading at the senior center. It's remarkable how many fascinating life stories remain untold simply because no one asked, I explained. People carry these rich narratives inside them, often assuming no one would be interested. Like you, Grandma, Tyler observed. I never knew about your civil rights activism in college until you mentioned it in your wedding poem, or that you and Grandpa once lived in France for a year. It never seemed relevant to bring up, I admitted. Once you reach a certain age, people tend to stop asking about your past. They see only who you are now, not the experiences that shaped you. Well, that's their loss, Melissa declared with the directness I'd come to appreciate. Judge Patterson, my father, still talks about your conversation at the wedding. He told me last week that he wishes he'd recorded your wisdom moment. Daniel looked thoughtful. Maybe someone should, he suggested. Record your stories, I mean. I'm hardly interesting enough for a biography, I protested. Not a biography, Tyler interjected, enthusiasm building in his voice. But maybe a video series. Grandma, you're a natural storyteller, and you have this way of connecting personal anecdotes to universal experiences. I laughed, dismissing the idea. Who would watch an elderly woman reminiscing? Lots of people, Melissa said, her professional assessment evident. As a marketing executive, she had a keen sense of audience potential. Authentic intergenerational wisdom is actually trending right now. There's a hunger for perspective that comes from lived experience rather than internet research. The conversation moved on, but I noticed Tyler and Melissa exchanging meaningful glances that suggested they weren't letting go of the idea as easily as I'd hoped. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, Tyler appeared at my door carrying professional video equipment and accompanied by a young woman he introduced as Zoe Chen, a videographer colleague from his architectural firm's marketing department. Before you protest, he preempted as I opened my mouth to object. Just hear us out. Zoe specializes in documentary-style personal narratives. No pressure, no scripts, just you sharing stories you're comfortable telling. It would be very casual. Mrs. Harrison, Zoe assured me, her earnest expression making me feel ancient at 76. We could start with just 1 or 2 sessions and see how you feel about it. I looked between their hopeful faces, torn between reluctance to be on camera and appreciation for their interest in my life experiences. 1 session, I conceded finally. Though I still think you're overestimating how fascinating my ordinary life has been. They set up in my living room, arranging lighting that Zoe promised would be flattering without being artificial. Tyler explained that he would ask occasional questions, but largely stay silent, allowing me to speak directly to the camera. Just pretend you're talking to a young person who could benefit from your perspective, he suggested. Like those memoir workshop participants you mentioned. Feeling self-conscious, I straightened my blouse and tried to remember Martha's advice about posture from the wedding preparation. Zoe counted down from 3, and recording began. Let's start with something simple, Tyler prompted from behind the camera. Could you tell us about your wedding day? The one detail that stands out most vividly after all these years? The question transported me instantly to 1963, to Robert's nervous smile and my mother's meticulously sewn gown. Before I realized it, I was describing not just the ceremony but the social context, the Cold War tensions, the national mourning after JFK's assassination just months earlier, the challenges of starting our married life during such tumultuous times. One question flowed naturally into the next. Tyler guided me through stories of early marriage, my teaching career, raising Daniel as the Vietnam War divided the nation, and later, my special relationship with Tyler during his formative years. You've lived through so many significant historical periods, Zoe commented during a break. But you make the history personal, relatable. History is always personal to those living through it, I replied. We just forget that when reading about it afterward. What I'd agreed to as a single session expanded to 3 hours, then an invitation to continue the following week. Against my expectations, I found myself enjoying the process, unearthing memories I hadn't revisited in decades and articulating life lessons I'd internalized without fully examining. Tyler seemed equally energized, his questions becoming more thoughtful as he discovered aspects of my life he'd never known. My brief stint writing for a local newspaper, the summer Robert and I spent restoring a sailboat, and my friendship with a renowned poet who had been my college roommate. I had no idea you published short stories in literary magazines, he marveled during our 3rd recording session. Do you still have copies? In the attic somewhere, I acknowledged. Nothing that would interest contemporary readers. You might be surprised, Zoe interjected. Many of these vintage publications have dedicated online followings now. Over the following month, our recording project developed a rhythm. Tyler would arrive with Zoe, record for 2 to 3 hours, then often stay afterward, helping me locate memorabilia related to stories I'd shared, photographs, letters, publications, and artifacts that provided visual context for my narratives. During one such search, we discovered a box containing every handwritten note Robert had ever given me throughout our marriage. Anniversary cards, love letters from business trips, even mundane grocery lists with affectionate postscripts. Tyler was visibly moved as I explained the significance of these seemingly ordinary papers. "This is what sustained marriage actually looks like," I told him. "Not grand gestures, but consistent small kindnesses accumulated over decades." "Would you mind if we included some of these in the video?" he asked, holding a particularly charming anniversary note featuring Robert's attempted poetry. "What exactly are you planning to do with all this footage?" I countered the question I'd been avoiding for weeks. Tyler looked slightly sheepish. "I'm not entirely sure yet. Initially, I just wanted to preserve your stories for our family, for baby Evelyn someday. But Zoe thinks there might be broader interest." "Broader interest?" "Tyler, I'm just an ordinary retired English teacher. With extraordinary perspective," he insisted. "Grandma, the way you contextualize personal experiences within historical moments, how you draw meaning from everyday occurrences, it's compelling. Zoe's shown some sample clips to her documentary filmmaker friends, and they agree. The idea that strangers might find value in my reminiscences was simultaneously flattering and terrifying. "I need to think about this," I said finally. "It's one thing to share family stories with you, another to broadcast them to the world." Tyler respected my hesitation, but left me with a thumb drive containing rough edits of our sessions. "Just watch them," he encouraged, "then decide." That evening, after Tyler left, I sat at my computer and reluctantly inserted the drive. The screen filled with my own face. Not the everyday reflection I saw in my mirror, but a woman speaking. With animation and confidence about experiences spanning 7 decades. Zoe's skilled editing had interwoven my stories with historical footage and photographs, creating context that elevated personal anecdotes into broader social commentary. I was startled to recognize that the woman on screen didn't fit any of the stereotypes about elderly people that pervade our culture. She wasn't cute or quaint or confused. She was articulate, thoughtful, occasionally funny, and unapologetically complex, exactly how I experienced myself internally, but rarely reflected in society's treatment of older women. Martha arrived the next morning for our weekly coffee date and found me still contemplating the implications of Tyler's project. "So he wants to make you a social media sensation," she summarized after I explained the situation. "The world's hippest great-grandmother." "Don't be ridiculous," I scoffed. "I'm just trying to decide if I'm comfortable having private memories shared publicly." "What memories exactly?" Martha challenged. "From what you've described, you've been sharing wisdom and perspective, not secrets. Your generation has been systematically silenced and sidelined, Evelyn. Maybe it's time to reclaim some cultural space." I considered her words carefully. I wouldn't know the first thing about social media sensation status. "You wouldn't need to. That's Tyler and Zoe's department." Martha leaned forward earnestly. "Remember how you felt being relegated to the corner at the wedding? This is the opposite, an opportunity to center not just yourself, but the entire demographic we represent." I had to admit she had a point. After directing a memoir workshop, I'd witnessed firsthand how empowering it was for older adults to have their stories acknowledged as meaningful. Perhaps the videos could serve a similar purpose on a larger scale. That Sunday's dinner provided the perfect opportunity to discuss next steps with Tyler. When I broached the subject, his face lit up, with barely restrained excitement. "I was hoping you'd want to continue," he admitted. "Melissa and I have been brainstorming format options. We were thinking of a series titled Corners and Centers inspired by your wedding poem, exploring how society marginalizes certain voices and experiences, with your perspective as the through line." "That's actually quite compelling," I acknowledged, impressed by how thoroughly they'd considered the concept. "We thought we'd start with a short documentary piece," Melissa added, "something we could submit to film festivals that focus on intergenerational themes. If there's interest, it could expand from there." Daniel, who had been listening quietly, suddenly contributed. I could help with potential legal considerations. Release. Forms, intellectual property protections, that sort of thing. Even Karen seemed supportive, suggesting contacts from her hospital administration network who might be interested in the wellness aspects of elder storytelling. Looking around the table at my family's genuine enthusiasm, I felt a profound shift in our dynamic. Just months earlier, they had been content to place me in a corner, an aging relative to be accommodated but not centered. Now they were collaboratively building a project that positioned my voice and experiences as valuable, even essential. I'm still not convinced my stories merit this level of attention, I said honestly. But if you believe they might resonate with others, I'm willing to continue. Tyler reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Grandma, that's exactly why. Your perspective is valuable. You don't recognize how exceptional your ordinary life has been, how your thoughtful navigation of seemingly mundane life moments contains wisdom others are searching for. As my family discussed logistical details of what was apparently becoming a legitimate documentary project, I reflected on the remarkable journey from that painful moment overhearing Tyler's corner comment to this dinner table collaboration, centering my voice and experiences. The perfect response to being sidelined hadn't ended with my wedding speech after all. It was continuing to unfold in ways I couldn't have anticipated, transforming not just how my family perceived me, but how I perceived myself and my potential contribution in my 8th decade of life. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat at my desk and opened my journal, a practice I'd maintained for over 50 years. I wrote, "Today marks a turning point I never expected at 76. What began as a defensive reaction to being marginalized has evolved into something generative and forward-looking. I don't know where this documentary project will lead, but I'm increasingly convinced that the stories we tell and who gets to tell them matters profoundly. Perhaps the wisdom I've been sharing actually applies most directly to myself. No one belongs in a corner. Not even, especially not, at 76. Take a deep breath, Mrs. Harrison. Try to relax." The makeup artist's gentle instruction barely registered as I sat rigidly in the director's chair, questioning every life decision that had led me to this moment. The small documentary project Tyler and Zoe had begun 9 months earlier had evolved into something I scarcely recognized or felt prepared for. Is this microphone placement comfortable? A sound technician adjusted the small device, clipped to my blouse collar. It's fine, I managed, though nothing about this situation felt fine. We were in a professionally lit studio space in Boston, preparing for my first live interview on New England Today, a regional morning show that had expressed interest in our documentary after a 7-minute segment had unexpectedly gone viral online. What had begun as family history preservation had transformed into a phenomenon none of us had anticipated. Tyler appeared at my side, sensing my distress. "Grandma, you've got this. Just be yourself, exactly as you've been in all our recording sessions." Those were private in my living room with my grandson, I reminded him, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Not broadcast to thousands of strangers. "Who've already fallen in love with you through the online clips," he countered. "This is just a conversation about the project, about the importance of intergenerational dialogue. Nothing you haven't already mastered." 8 months earlier, Tyler and Zoe had completed a 23-minute documentary titled Corners and Centers, An American Life. The film artfully wove my personal narratives with historical context, focusing particularly on how women's roles had evolved during my lifetime. They had submitted it to several small film festivals, expecting modest reception at best. To everyone's surprise, the documentary won awards at 3 festivals, including the Audience Choice Award at a prestigious showcase for new filmmakers. A producer for PBS had expressed interest in developing it into a series. Most unexpectedly, a 6-minute excerpt posted online had been shared hundreds of thousands of times, resonating particularly with viewers in their 20s and 30s. The comments section brimmed with responses that both moved and baffled me. Wish my grandmother had shared her stories like this before she passed. Never realized how much historical context my own life is missing. Can Mrs. Harrison adopt me? I need this wisdom in my life. The sudden attention had been disorienting. Former students reached out after decades. Distant relatives made contact. Strangers sent emails through the documentary's website, sharing how specific anecdotes had resonated with their own experiences. 2 minutes, Mrs. Harrison, the producer announced, intensifying my anxiety. Martha, who had appointed herself my unofficial manager, appeared with a cup of tea. Remember what we practiced, she murmured, handing me the steaming cup. Short, thoughtful answers. Personal, but universal. And if they ask something too invasive, I redirect to the documentary's themes rather than my personal details. I finished, grateful for her steady presence. Despite my reluctance about this new public role, Martha had embraced it wholeheartedly, coordinating my schedule and fielding inquiries with surprising professionalism. The studio door opened, admitting the morning show's host, Diane Mercer, a polished woman in her 40s with the practiced warmth of a veteran broadcaster. Mrs. Harrison, I'm so delighted to meet you. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine. My mother hasn't stopped talking about your documentary since I shared it with her. She said it was like watching her own life validated on screen. Something in her sincerity calmed my nerves slightly. That's very kind. Connecting across generations has been the most unexpected reward of this project. That's exactly what we want to discuss today, Diane assured me. Nothing too personal or invasive, just the importance of preserving life stories and the surprising response to your documentary. As we moved to the interview set, arranged to resemble a comfortable living room, I spotted Melissa entering the studio, her 4-month-old daughter Evelyn cradled against her shoulder. She offered an encouraging thumbs up before settling in the green room to watch the broadcast. 30 seconds? Called the floor director. I smoothed my jacket, a deep emerald that Martha had insisted brought out my eyes, and tried to channel the confidence I'd felt during Tyler's wedding. This was another moment requiring me to step out of my comfort zone to claim space rather than accepting marginalization. The interview began with standard introductions and a brief clip from the documentary. The segment where I described how my traditional expectations of married life in the early 1960s had collided with the emerging feminist movement, creating internal conflicts that took years to reconcile. Mrs. Harrison, that clip resonates with so many viewers because you articulate conflicts we all experience between societal expectations and personal growth, Diane began. Was it difficult to share these insights so openly? The question was thoughtful, creating an opening for meaningful dialogue rather than superficial reminiscence. My tension eased slightly as I responded. Initially, yes. I'd never considered my ordinary life worth documenting. Like many women of my generation, I was conditioned to minimize my experiences, to avoid appearing self-important. I smiled, finding my rhythm. My grandson Tyler created a safe space to explore these stories, which made vulnerability possible. Speaking of your grandson, the documentary began with a rather remarkable incident at his wedding. Could you share that story with our viewers? I hesitated briefly, aware that Tyler and his parents were watching. We had discussed this moment extensively before including it in the documentary, ultimately deciding that its transformative impact outweighed potential embarrassment. I accidentally overheard my grandson suggesting they seat me in a corner at his wedding where I wouldn't be noticed, I explained, keeping my tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. It was painful, but also illuminating. It crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't fully acknowledged, that aging in our society often means becoming progressively invisible. And your response was to offer to write a poem for the ceremony, Diane prompted. Yes, though offer sounds more strategic than it was, I admitted with a small laugh. It was an impulsive counterproposal, a way to reclaim visibility without direct confrontation. The interview continued smoothly as we discussed the documentary's themes, how personal narratives intersect with historical moments, the importance of intergenerational dialogue, and the unexpected online response from younger viewers seeking connection with older wisdom. What has surprised you most about this journey from private grandmother to, essentially, a public figure? Diane asked as our segment neared its conclusion. I considered the question carefully. The hunger for authentic intergenerational connection. We've created a society where age groups are increasingly segregated, different living arrangements, different entertainment, different digital platforms. The response to our documentary suggests people are craving bridges across those divides. And what would you say to other seniors who might have stories to share but feel they wouldn't be valued? Start with one person, I advised, thinking of how my journey had begun with Tyler. Find someone willing to truly listen, someone who values perspective over novelty. Document your experiences in whatever format feels comfortable: writing, audio recording, video. Your stories matter, not because they're extraordinary, but because they're authentically yours. As the segment concluded, Diane thanked me warmly, adding, I understand your great-granddaughter is here today, named after you. Would it be all right to invite her and her parents on camera briefly? I nodded, genuinely pleased by this unexpected addition. Tyler and Melissa joined us, baby Evelyn drowsily observing the studio lights with curious eyes. The 4 generations represented here span nearly a century of American experience, Diane observed. What do you hope baby Evelyn will understand? Someday about her great-grandmother's legacy? Tyler answered before I could formulate a response. That courage doesn't always look like grand heroism. Sometimes it's simply refusing to be made invisible, standing up for your rightful place in the world and in your family. He glanced at me with unmistakable admiration, and that it's never too late to redefine your story. After the broadcast, we gathered in the green room where Martha immediately engulfed me in a congratulatory hug. You were magnificent, poised, articulate, authentic, exactly what we hoped for. We? I raised an eyebrow. The unofficial Evelyn Harrison Appreciation Society, she replied with a grin. Currently numbering approximately 200,000 followers across various platforms. The reality of this new public dimension to my life still felt surreal, but the interview had been surprisingly energizing. Speaking about the documentary's themes had reminded me why I'd ultimately embraced the project. Not for personal recognition, but for the broader dialogue it enabled. Melissa approached, transferring baby Evelyn into my eager arms. The producer wants to talk about potential follow-up segments, she informed me. Apparently, the response on social media has been overwhelming. They're suggesting a recurring guest spot discussing historical events from your personal perspective. A regular television appearance? At my age? I laughed, adjusting the blanket around my great-granddaughter. That seems excessive. Actually, it's strategic, Tyler interjected. The PBS development team is meeting next month about the potential series. Having established public interest would strengthen our proposal. I studied him thoughtfully, noticing how this project had matured him in unexpected ways. He navigated these professional opportunities with newfound confidence, yet remained protective of my comfort and dignity throughout the process. The grandson who had once thoughtlessly relegated me to a corner now championed my voice in public forums. I'll consider it, I conceded, though I still maintain that I'm an unlikely media personality. That's exactly why you're connecting with audiences, Melissa pointed out. You're authentic in a landscape of carefully curated personas. People respond to that genuineness. As we prepared to leave the studio, the receptionist approached with a thick manila envelope. These arrived for Mrs. Harrison this morning, she explained, handing me the package. Inside were dozens of handwritten letters, actual paper correspondence, in an age of digital communication. I opened one at random, written in the uneven script of an elderly hand. Dear Mrs. Harrison, your documentary gave me the courage to begin recording my own stories for my grandchildren. At 89, I feared no one would be interested, but your example inspired me to try. My granddaughter brings her laptop every Sunday now, and we've completed 6 sessions about my childhood during the Depression. Thank you for showing that our stories matter. Sincerely, Margaret Collins, Portland, Maine. I blinked back unexpected, tears passing the letter to Tyler. Similar messages filled the envelope, from seniors inspired to share their experiences, from young people who had initiated conversations with grandparents, from teachers using the documentary in classrooms, to connect historical events with personal narratives. This is the real impact, I said softly, touched by these tangible responses. Not view counts or media appearances, but actual human connections being formed. Martha squeezed my shoulder. And it all started because you refused to be put in a corner at a wedding. Life's defining moments rarely announce themselves in advance, I observed, watching baby Evelyn drift to sleep in my arms, unaware of her namesake's unlikely late-life emergence as a cultural commentator. The next week brought another unexpected development. Daniel and Karen arrived for Sunday dinner with unusually serious expressions. We've made some decisions, Daniel announced, after the meal, as we settled in the living room with coffee. I've given notice at the firm. Effective in 3 months, I'll be officially retired. Though he had mentioned considering retirement during our previous conversation, the finality of this decision surprised me. Are you certain? That's quite a lifestyle change. It is, Karen agreed, her expression more relaxed than I'd seen in years. But we've been inspired by you, Evelyn. Watching you embrace new challenges at 76 has forced us to reconsider our assumptions about age and possibility. Daniel nodded. We've purchased a small cottage near Rockport. I'll be teaching 1 seminar at the law school each semester, and Karen's transitioning to part-time hospital administration. We want more time for family, for community involvement, for living deliberately rather than mechanically. I was momentarily speechless, unprepared for my children to cite me as inspiration for major life restructuring. After decades of subtle criticism about my modest career and lifestyle choices, this recognition felt like a profound vindication. We're hoping you'll consult on our cottage renovation, Karen added, further astonishing me. Your sense of creating meaningful living spaces has always impressed me, though I haven't expressed that adequately. I'd be delighted, I managed, trying to absorb this fundamental shift in our relationship dynamic. Later that evening, after they'd departed, I called Martha to process these developments. They've actually been different since the wedding, I reflected. But this degree of change is unexpected. Not really, Martha countered. You've been modeling authentic living all along, Evelyn. The documentary and media attention just made your example impossible to ignore. Plus, she added pragmatically, no one wants to be overshadowed by their elderly mother's cultural relevance. I laughed at her blunt assessment. I doubt that's their motivation. Don't be so sure. Daniel was a big fish in his corporate law pond. Now his mother is getting recognized at the grocery store and receiving fan mail. That's bound to prompt some reevaluation. As spring melted into summer, our documentary project continued gaining momentum. The PBS development team approved a 6-episode series exploring American history through personal narratives, with me serving as the primary guide alongside other seniors with diverse experiences. Tyler was hired as an associate producer, leveraging his newly discovered talent for visual storytelling. Production would begin in September, requiring a more demanding schedule than our initial casual recording sessions. The prospect was both exhilarating and mildly terrifying. At 77, I was embarking on a professional adventure most people wouldn't contemplate at any age. One evening, as I sat on my porch enjoying the summer twilight, I found myself contemplating the extraordinary journey from that painful moment in Tyler's kitchen, overhearing his dismissive, Just put Grandma in the corner, to becoming the centerpiece of a documentary series celebrating the wisdom of age. The perfect response hadn't been just my wedding speech, though that had catalyzed the transformation. The perfect response had been refusing to accept invisibility at any level, within my family, within my community, within the broader culture that systematically sidelined older voices. My phone chimed with a text from Tyler. PBS publicist needs updated bio by Friday. Also, Zoom meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. with the educational outreach team. Baby Evelyn says hi, or would if she could talk. I smiled, typing my acknowledgement while marveling at how thoroughly my daily reality had transformed. From a retired teacher whose family viewed her as peripheral, I had become a woman with purpose, projects, and public value. Not despite my age, but because of the perspective it provided. The golden evening light lengthened shadows across my garden as I considered what lay ahead. Production schedules, interviews, public appearances, a voice that now extended far beyond family dinner conversations, all because I had refused to remain in the corner. That's a wrap on episode 4. Thank you, everyone! The director's announcement triggered a flurry of activity as the production crew began dismantling equipment. Lights powered down, microphones were unclipped, and the converted warehouse space that had served as our primary filming location gradually transformed from television studio back to empty industrial shell. I sank into my chair, exhaustion and satisfaction mingling as I accepted the bottled water a production assistant offered. 4 episodes completed, 2 remaining in our PBS series, Across Time, American Lives in Perspective. What had begun 18 months earlier with Tyler's wedding and my impromptu poetry reading had evolved into a full-fledged documentary series, now nearing completion. "You were brilliant today, Grandma," Tyler declared, approaching with clipboard in hand and the harried expression that had become his permanent feature since assuming associate producer responsibilities. At 30, my grandson had discovered an unexpected talent for visual storytelling that was rapidly building his professional reputation. The segment with Professor Reynolds about women's changing educational opportunities flowed perfectly into "your anecdotes about college expectations in the 60s, he continued. The contrast between your experience and my mother's generation landed exactly as we hoped. I smiled, still adjusting to this reverse dynamic where my grandson directed my professional activities. The questions about the Vietnam-era protests were challenging. I worried I wasn't being balanced enough. "That's precisely why viewers connect with you," Tyler assured me. "You don't pretend to have perfect objectivity. You acknowledge your perspective while respecting others' experiences." As the studio emptied, Melissa arrived with 13-month-old Evelyn toddling determinedly beside her, one tiny hand gripping her mother's finger for balance. At the sight of Tyler, the baby released her support and launched herself forward, in an ambitious series of wobbly steps, collapsing triumphantly against her father's legs. "Walking progress continues," Melissa announced proudly, "though direction control remains a work in progress." "Much like this production," Tyler quipped, scooping up his daughter and planting kisses on her rounded cheeks. "How's my favorite? Tiny human, ready to watch Great Grandma's episode?" "Ganma," baby Evelyn responded, a recent linguistic development that never failed to warm my heart. "Speaking of watching," Melissa said, settling beside me while Tyler entertained the baby, "Judge Patterson called. He and Catherine are hosting a viewing party for episode 3 when it airs next month. They've invited half the Boston legal community." The mention of Melissa's father, the once intimidating federal judge who had initially seemed skeptical of our family, highlighted another unexpected consequence of my documentary journey. The Pattersons had become enthusiastic supporters of the project, with Judge Patterson particularly vocal about the historical value of preserving first-person perspectives on 20th-century American experiences. "That's very kind," I replied, though the thought of distinguished legal minds analyzing my personal reflections on civil rights movements and constitutional developments triggered a flutter of anxiety. Kind, yes, but also strategic, Melissa observed with the pragmatic assessment she'd inherited from her father. Your perspective on witnessing these historical moments firsthand adds valuable context to legal discussions. Dad says you've made constitutional history personal for his colleagues in ways law school never managed. This unexpected professional validation from the judicial community was just one of many surprising outcomes from our documentary series. Academic institutions had requested screening rights for history and sociology courses. Senior centers organized viewing groups with facilitated discussions afterward. My perspective, once valued only within the confines of my high school English classroom, now reached audiences I could never have imagined. Tyler rejoined us, baby Evelyn now perched on his shoulders. Production meeting canceled, so we're free for the evening. Mom and Dad are expecting us for dinner. They want to share renovation updates on the cottage. The mention of Daniel and Karen's coastal cottage renovation project, now nearing completion, reminded me how thoroughly our family dynamics had transformed. My son's retirement from corporate law had coincided with Karen's transition to part-time hospital administration, creating space for both to reassess priorities. They had embraced simpler living with unexpected enthusiasm, with Karen developing a passion for native plant gardening that had transformed their property into a showcase of ecological landscaping. I'm looking forward to seeing their progress, I said, gathering my belongings. Karen mentioned something about incorporating elements from my childhood home into their kitchen design. She's had cabinet makers replicate your mother's corner. Hutch, Tyler confirmed. Apparently, your stories about family gatherings around that specific piece resonated deeply with her. This thoughtful gesture from my once-distant daughter-in-law exemplified her evolution over the past year and a half. Karen, who had once treated me as an obligation to be managed, now actively sought connections to family history and traditions. She had become one of the documentary's most vocal advocates, organizing community screenings and championing its educational applications. As we left the studio, I paused to sign several copies of the companion book that had been published to accompany our series. The production staff had grown accustomed to my discomfort with this aspect of our success, but insisted that personal inscriptions meant a great deal to them. My grandmother cried when I showed her your episode about rural electrification, a young sound technician told me as I signed her copy. She grew up in Appalachia and said you captured exactly what it felt like when electricity finally reached their hollow in 1953. These moments of connection, when my ordinary recollections sparked recognition and validation in others, provided the most meaningful reward from this unlikely late-life venture into public storytelling. The drive to Daniel and Karen's primary, residents took us through autumn-painted Massachusetts landscapes that never failed to inspire appreciation. Baby Evelyn babbled happily from her car seat, occasionally shouting "tree" or "doggy" when something caught her attention. PBS called this morning, Tyler mentioned as we neared our destination. Viewership numbers for episode 2 were even stronger than the premiere. They're already discussing a potential second season exploring different thematic angles. I turned from admiring the scenery to study his profile. You seem hesitant. I thought you'd be thrilled by that possibility, he glanced at Melissa briefly before responding. Professionally, absolutely. It's an incredible opportunity. But, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I worry about the pace becoming too demanding for you, Grandma. You turned 78 last month. The shooting schedule has been grueling even for the younger crew members. His concern touched me, though I found myself mildly amused by his protective instinct. I appreciate your consideration, but I believe I'm capable of assessing my own limitations. Of course you are, he backpedaled quickly. I just don't want you feeling obligated to continue if it becomes overwhelming. Tyler's concerned because the network is suggesting a more ambitious travel component for Season 2, Melissa explained more directly. On-location shooting at historical sites across the country, rather than primarily studio-based interviews. This additional context clarified his hesitation. The current production, while demanding, had been structured around my comfort, filming primarily within driving distance of my home, with reasonable schedules and frequent breaks. A travel-intensive second season would represent a significant escalation in physical demands. I see, I said thoughtfully. Well, that would certainly require careful consideration. There's no rush to decide, Tyler assured me. They're just floating concepts at this stage. We arrived at Daniel and Karen's house, still their primary residence, though they spent increasing time at the coastal cottage. The elegant colonial had undergone subtle transformation since Daniel's retirement, shifting from showcasing professional success to reflecting more personal values. Family photographs had replaced formal artwork. Comfortable seating had supplanted showpiece furniture. The overall atmosphere had softened, becoming more welcoming and less presentational. Karen greeted us warmly, immediately claiming baby Evelyn for grandmother's privileges. Daniel's in the kitchen attempting beef Wellington, she informed us, with affectionate exasperation. A new cooking class enthusiasm we're all about to experience for better or worse. The relaxed Karen, who now joked about potential culinary disasters, bore little resemblance to the tightly controlled woman who had once suggested relegating me to a corner at her son's wedding. Her evolution paralleled our entire family's transformation, moving from rigid roles and expectations toward more authentic connection. "Mom," Daniel called from the kitchen. "Perfect timing. I need your opinion on this pastry." Throughout dinner, conversation flowed naturally between family updates, documentary progress, and plans for baby Evelyn's upcoming birthday celebration. The Wellington proved surprisingly successful, prompting good-natured teasing about Daniel's emerging culinary talents. "So," Karen said as we moved to the living room for coffee, "tell us about this potential second season Tyler mentioned on the phone." I explained the network's initial concept, expanding our historical exploration through on-location filming at significant sites across America. "That sounds fascinating," Daniel commented, "but also physically demanding." "That's my concern," Tyler agreed, "though the network would ensure comfortable accommodations and transportation." "I haven't decided whether to participate," I clarified, "though I admit there's something appealing about visiting these historical locations I've only read about." "You should do it," Karen stated with unexpected conviction. "If your health permits and proper accommodations are made, this could be an extraordinary opportunity." Her enthusiastic support surprised me. "You think so?" "Absolutely. How many 78-year-olds get invited to host a national documentary series? If you're physically able, why not embrace it?" Her expression softened. "Besides, you've spent decades prioritizing others, raising Daniel, supporting Robert through his career moves, helping with Tyler. Perhaps it's time to prioritize your own adventure." This sentiment, from the woman who had once viewed me primarily as a burdensome elderly relative, demonstrated how completely our family dynamics had evolved. Daniel nodded agreement. "Mom, watching you step into this public role has been inspiring. The woman who recorded that first casual conversation with Tyler has blossomed into someone with meaningful cultural impact." His pride warmed me deeply. For decades, I'd felt subtly dismissed by my corporate lawyer son, my teaching career and community involvement seemingly insignificant compared to his prestigious accomplishments. Now he spoke of my cultural impact with genuine respect. "I'll consider it," I promised, though privately I'd already begun imagining the possibilities. Visiting Seneca Falls, where the women's movement began, standing at Promontory Point, where the Transcontinental Railroad was completed. Walking the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. The historian in me thrilled at these prospects, while the practical septuagenarian acknowledged the physical challenges they might present. Later that evening, as Tyler drove me home, I broached a different concern that had been percolating. I've been thinking about Martha, I began. Her arthritis has worsened considerably in recent months. She's struggling with basic household management. Tyler glanced over, immediately alert to the undertone in my voice. You're worried about her living alone? Increasingly, yes. She'd never admit it, but everyday tasks are becoming difficult. I paused, organizing my thoughts. This potential travel schedule for season 2, it's not compatible with providing the support she needs. Ah, Tyler said, understanding dawning. You're considering declining because of Martha. She's been my dearest friend for over 50 years, I replied simply. Some priorities transcend professional opportunities. Tyler drove in thoughtful silence for several minutes before suggesting, what about a compromise? Martha could join. You not for filming necessarily, but traveling with the production as your companion. The network would cover expenses, and she'd have support services available when you're filming. The creative solution startled me. They'd agree to that arrangement? They want you for this series, Grandma. You're the authenticating presence. That gives the project credibility. If Martha's inclusion makes your participation possible, I'm confident they'll accommodate it. This unexpected resolution to my principal concern removed the last major obstacle to considering the second season. If Martha could accompany me, enjoying comfortable travel accommodations while managing her arthritis in climate-controlled environments, perhaps we could transform a potential limitation into an opportunity for both of us. The following Sunday, I invited Martha for lunch to discuss this possibility. At 79, her once nimble movements had slowed considerably, though her sharp mind and acerbic wit remained unchanged. They want to send us gallivanting across America, she clarified after I explained the proposal. 2 old ladies touring historical sites with a film crew in tow? That's the general concept, I confirmed, uncertain whether her tone indicated interest or skepticism. Well, it beats sitting home watching my garden slowly die because I can't manage the weeding anymore, she declared pragmatically, though I have conditions, such as private accommodations. I'm not sharing a bathroom at our age, first class, travel arrangements, and a flexible schedule that accommodates my good days and bad days. She fixed me with her characteristic directness. Oh, and I want to be acknowledged in the credits. Martha Sullivan, companion and voice of reason to Evelyn Harrison. I laughed, relieved by her enthusiastic response. I'll have Tyler write that into the contract. Martha leaned forward, suddenly serious. Evelyn, do you realize how extraordinary this is? 2 years ago, your grandson wanted to hide you in a corner at his wedding. Now a national network is building a documentary series around your perspective and willing to accommodate your elderly friend for the privilege of having you involved. Put that way, the transformation did seem remarkable. Life takes unexpected turns, I acknowledged. That's underselling it considerably, Martha countered. You didn't just experience unexpected turns, you actively redirected your path. When faced with marginalization, you claimed space instead. That choice continues reverberating in ways none of us could have predicted. Her assessment was accurate. The perfect response referenced in my original wedding poem had expanded far beyond that single moment, evolving into a philosophy that now guided my approach to aging, to family relationships, and to cultural engagement. 2 weeks later, contracts were finalized for Across Time Season 2, Historic America. Production would begin in spring, after a 3-month hiatus following completion of our current episodes. Martha's participation as my traveling companion was formally acknowledged, with accommodations for her arthritis needs built into the production schedule. The evening after signing the contracts, I found myself reflecting on this extraordinary chapter of life as I sorted through old photographs for possible inclusion in our final episodes. Images spanning decades spread across my dining room table, my college graduation, wedding to Robert, Daniel as a toddler, my early teaching years, Tyler's childhood milestones. and more recent editions capturing baby Evelyn's first year. The Rai telephone interrupted my reminiscence, Martha calling to share excitement about our upcoming adventure. "I've been researching the historical sites on the preliminary itinerary," she announced without preamble. "Did you know the Little Rock Central High School National Historic Site has an exceptional visitor center? And the guides at Independence Hall in Philadelphia are apparently the best in the National Park Service." Her enthusiasm made me smile. We've come a long way from considering ourselves too old for new experiences. Too old? Nonsense. We're not old, we're historic, like the sites we'll be visiting, she declared with characteristic humor. Living artifacts providing first-person perspective on the American century. After our conversation, I returned to sorting photographs, pausing over one taken at Tyler and Melissa's wedding, capturing me at the microphone delivering my poem, my expression confident despite the anxiety I'd felt in that moment. Beside it lay a recent production still from our documentary series, showing me engaged in animated conversation with a civil rights historian, equally poised but with a different quality of confidence, one born from 18 months of increasingly public engagement. The contrast between these images illustrated the journey from that painful moment overhearing, "Just put Grandma in the corner," to becoming someone whose perspective was valued enough to build a national documentary series around. The transformation hadn't been instantaneous or linear, but rather a series of choices to claim space rather than accepting marginalization. Baby Evelyn's photograph caught my eye next, her 13-month-old determination as she navigated the world on unsteady legs. My great-granddaughter would grow up with a fundamentally different understanding of aging than previous generations had absorbed. For her, a grandmother wasn't someone to be tucked away in corners, but rather a vital presence capable of meaningful cultural contribution well into her 8th decade. This legacy, far more than any television series or companion book, represented the true significance of my perfect response to that wedding seating arrangement. By refusing invisibility, I had inadvertently modeled a different approach to aging, not just for Tyler, but for our entire family constellation, and, unexpectedly, for a national audience. As I carefully returned photographs to their albums, I smiled at this unanticipated late-life chapter. The woman who had once been deemed unworthy of prominent placement at her grandson's wedding was now preparing to travel across America, documenting historical sites for PBS viewers, while accommodations were made for her elderly friend to accompany the production. Life indeed took unexpected turns. But as Martha had observed, the most meaningful turns weren't those that happened to us, but rather those we actively chose when confronted with attempts to diminish our presence or value. Tomorrow would bring another filming day for our current series. Beyond that waited production meetings for Season 2, travel arrangements with Martha, and continuing evolution of this unlikely professional endeavor. But tonight, surrounded by photographic evidence of a life fully lived across nearly 8 decades, I savored the simple satisfaction of having refused that corner, and all the corners that might have followed if I'd accepted that initial displacement. Sometimes, the perfect response isn't just a moment, but a movement. Not just a statement, but a stance. Not just standing up once, but continuing to stand firmly in the center of your own life, regardless of who might prefer you step aside. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the recipient of this year's Lifetime Achievement Award in Documentary Storytelling, Mrs. Evelyn Harrison. The audience rose in a standing ovation as I made my way carefully to the podium. At 81, I moved more deliberately than I once had, but I refused the wheelchair the event organizers had suggested. Some moments demanded standing on one's own 2 feet. The elegant ballroom of the Kennedy Center glittered with industry luminaries gathered for the annual Documentary Film Awards. Faces I'd previously seen only on television or movie screens now turned toward me with expressions of genuine respect. In the front row, Tyler beamed with pride beside Melissa, while 3-year-old Evelyn, dressed in a miniature formal gown, clapped enthusiastically without fully understanding the occasion. Martha, elegant despite her arthritis in a deep purple ensemble we'd selected together, gave me an encouraging thumbs up from her seat beside Daniel and Karen. My friend's health had stabilized with advanced treatments over the past 3 years, allowing her to continue as my stalwart companion throughout our travels for across time. 3 years had passed since that pivotal PBS meeting where we'd decided to embark on the second season of our documentary series. What had begun as a modest proposal for historical site visits had evolved into an ambitious exploration of American experience spanning 26 locations across 18 states. The travel had been challenging but exhilarating, with Martha and I navigating from the Alamo to Ellis Island, from Wounded Knee to the Stonewall Inn. The resulting series had captured the nation's imagination in ways none of us had anticipated, garnering critical acclaim, educational adoption, and viewership that consistently exceeded PBS projections. More importantly, it had sparked community discussions about historical perspective, intergenerational dialogue, and the role of personal narrative in understanding our collective past. Now, improbably, I stood before the documentary industry's most prestigious gathering, preparing to accept an award typically reserved for filmmakers with decades of professional experience, not former English teachers who had stumbled into the field after 75. "Thank you for this extraordinary honor," I began, adjusting the microphone to my height, though I must admit to feeling somewhat fraudulent. 3 years ago, I didn't know the difference between B-roll and a boom mic. Appreciative laughter rippled through the audience. My journey to this podium began with rejection, with being relegated to the proverbial corner at my grandson's wedding. I paused, finding Tyler's gaze in the front row. His expression held no embarrassment, only affection and pride. That painful moment could have reinforced damaging cultural narratives about aging. Instead, it became catalyst for what you've generously called a groundbreaking exploration of American history through personal narrative. The teleprompter displayed my carefully prepared remarks, but I found myself setting them aside, drawn, instead to speak more authentically about the unexpected path that had brought me here. Throughout our travels documenting America's historical sites, I've observed how history itself is often relegated to corners, sanitized, simplified, separated from lived experience. Just as seniors are frequently marginalized in our youth-obsessed culture, our complex national story is often flattened into comfortable narratives that remove discomfort and contradiction. The audience's attention deepened, industry professionals leaning forward slightly in recognition of this departure from standard award acceptance protocol. What our documentary series attempted, and what I believe resonated with viewers, was the reclamation of both aging and history from these corners. By centering older voices in historical dialogue, we challenged dual marginalization simultaneously. I gestured toward Tyler in acknowledgement. My grandson's initial impulse to seat me where I wouldn't be noticed accidentally launched this endeavor. His subsequent commitment to amplifying my voice, and by extension, the voices of an entire generation, transformed what could have been merely family tension into cultural conversation. The teleprompter operator had given up trying to follow my off-script remarks, the screen now blank as I continued from the heart. At 81, I've witnessed America's transformation across nearly 8 decades. I've seen technologies replace technologies, cultural norms evolve then dissolve, political certainties crumble and reform. This longitudinal perspective isn't a liability to be hidden away, but rather a resource to be centered, particularly in our fragmented ahistorical moment. The ballroom remained hushed, the industry audience engaged by this departure from typical acceptance speeches. The most meaningful feedback I've received hasn't come from critics or ratings, but from the thousands of letters sent by viewers who've subsequently initiated conversations with their own older relatives. Families across America have discovered that grandparents and great-grandparents aren't burdens to be managed, but rather archives to be explored, wisdom to be treasured. I spotted the time warning light blinking discreetly, signaling that I should conclude. I accept this honor on behalf of everyone who has ever been relegated to a corner, whether due to age, background, appearance, or circumstance. May we all find the courage to step forward, to claim our rightful place in the center of our own stories and our shared American narrative. The standing ovation that followed felt less like personal validation and more like collective recognition of something larger than myself. A cultural shift in how we perceive aging and historical perspective that our documentary had helped catalyze. As I returned to my seat, Tyler embraced me with tears in his eyes. "That was perfect, Grandma," he whispered, though entirely off script. "Some moments require spontaneity," I replied, squeezing his hand. The remainder of the ceremony passed in a blur of presentations and performances. Afterward, at the reception, a steady stream of industry figures approached to share how our documentary series had influenced their own work or inspired projects focused on intergenerational dialogue. "Mrs. Harrison," called a familiar voice, cutting through the crowded reception. Judge Patterson, Melissa's father and now a senior circuit court judge, approached with his wife Catherine. Magnificent speech. Exactly the historical perspective needed in these fractured times. Over the past 3 years, Andrew Patterson had evolved from skeptical father-in-law to enthusiastic advocate for our documentary work, even appearing as a guest expert in our episode examining landmark Supreme Court decisions he had witnessed throughout his legal career. "Thank you, Andrew," I replied, still adjusting to the first-name basis he had insisted upon. Though I fear I strayed rather dramatically from my prepared remarks. "The best addresses always do," he assured me. "Authenticity resonates more powerfully than polished rhetoric." "Speaking of resonance," Catherine interjected, "we've had inquiries from 3 university press editors about publishing your collected speeches and commentary. There's significant academic interest in your framework for historical interpretation." This information startled me. Academic interest? In my perspective? "Don't act so surprised, Evelyn." Martha joined the conversation, champagne flute in hand. "You've been essentially delivering masterclasses in historical contextualization for 3 seasons now. The universities are simply catching up to what viewers already recognized." Before I could respond, little Evelyn wiggled through the crowd to tug at my evening gown. "Great Grandma, Daddy says it's time for the special surprise." Tyler appeared behind his daughter, apologetic. "Sorry, Grandma. She wasn't supposed to mention that yet." "What surprise?" I asked, suddenly suspicious. "You'll see," he said with the mischievous expression that had characterized him since childhood. "If you'll all follow me to the terrace?" Our small family procession, expanded now to include the Pattersons, Martha, several PBS executives, and even the Documentary Award chairperson, made its way through French doors onto the Kennedy Center's expansive terrace overlooking the Potomac River. The spring evening was unusually mild for Washington, cherry blossoms illuminated by the venue's tasteful exterior lighting. A small podium had been arranged discreetly in one corner, with what appeared to be a covered picture easel beside it. Tyler guided me to a central position, then stepped to the podium. 3 years ago, he began, addressing our gathered circle. My grandmother discovered a recording project we began together was being considered for development by PBS. Tonight, we celebrate not just the industry recognition of that work, but something much more significant. He gestured for Daniel to join him. My son stepped forward, clearly part of whatever had been planned. "When I was in high school," Daniel continued, "my mother supported me through a difficult period of academic uncertainty. Though she never mentioned it, she put aside her own educational aspirations to ensure mine could continue. Her planned doctoral studies remained incomplete as she prioritized family needs. This unexpected reference to a decision made nearly 4 decades earlier caught me off guard. I had rarely discussed my deferred academic ambitions, the PhD program I'd been accepted to but never attended due to family circumstances. Several months ago, Tyler picked up the narrative. We approached Elmwood University about a special recognition. He nodded to a distinguished older woman I hadn't noticed among our group. Dr. Helen Winters, Chair of American Studies at Elmwood, has an announcement. Dr. Winters stepped forward, her academic gravitas evident despite the festive setting. Mrs. Harrison, your documentary series has transformed how we teach historical perspective in our department. The interdisciplinary framework you've developed, connecting personal narrative with historical events, represents a significant methodological contribution to the field. She gestured to a younger colleague, who removed the covering from the easel to reveal an elegantly framed document. The Board of Trustees has unanimously approved conferring upon you an honorary doctorate of humane letters, in recognition of your exceptional contribution to American historical dialogue and documentary arts. The formal ceremony will take place during June commencement, but we wanted to share this news tonight while your family is gathered. Stunned, I stared at the ornate announcement, emotions overwhelming my usual composure. The academic recognition I'd reluctantly abandoned decades earlier had found me in an entirely unexpected form in my 9th decade. I don't know what to say, I managed finally. That's a first, Martha quipped, drawing affectionate laughter from our circle. The celebration continued late into the evening. As formal festivities concluded, our family gathered in the hotel suite Tyler had arranged, continuing our private commemoration in comfortable surroundings. Little Evelyn, despite insisting she wasn't tired, fell asleep curled against my side on the sofa. I still can't believe you arranged this doctoral recognition, I said to Tyler as others conversed across the room. How did you even know about my deferred academic plans? Found your acceptance letter while digitizing family documents for the first documentary, he admitted. It was tucked inside your college yearbook, from the University of Michigan doctoral program in American literature, dated 1967. I never mentioned that to anyone except your grandfather, I marveled. It didn't seem relevant once I'd decided. Family needs took priority. Which is precisely why you deserve this recognition, Tyler insisted. You've spent your life prioritizing others, Dad's education, Grandpa's career opportunities, my childhood needs. This honorary doctorate acknowledges the intellectual contribution you've made despite those sacrifices. As midnight approached, I found myself on the suite's balcony with Martha, both of us enjoying the relative quiet after hours of celebration. Did you ever imagine when we were preparing for Tyler's wedding that we'd end up here? I asked, gesturing toward the Washington Monument illuminated against the night sky. Attending documentary awards at the Kennedy Center? Traveling across America filming historical narratives? Being addressed as Dr. Harrison in academic circles? Martha laughed. Not remotely. I thought we were simply ensuring you wouldn't be tucked away in a corner at a wedding reception. Life takes extraordinary turns, I observed, not without direction, Martha countered. The turns in your case have been largely self-determined, Evelyn. When marginalized, you chose visibility. When underestimated, you demonstrated capacity. When offered an opportunity, you embraced the challenge. Her assessment made me uncomfortable, as acknowledgments of my agency often did. It sounds more strategic than it felt, I demurred. Most of these developments happened organically. Organically, perhaps, but not accidentally, Martha insisted. Your refusal to accept diminishment created space for everything that followed. As Martha returned inside, Karen joined me on the balcony, offering a cashmere wrap against the slight. Evening chill. Our relationship had evolved dramatically over the years since Tyler's wedding, developing a warmth and mutual respect that would have seemed impossible when she'd agreed with relegating me to a corner. Thank you for the wrap, I said, accepting both the garment and the thoughtfulness it represented. The speech you gave tonight was extraordinary, she observed, especially the part about corners, both literal and metaphorical. I smiled, remembering how uncomfortable that reference would once have made her. It seems I've built an entire late-life career on that single metaphor. Because it resonates universally, Karen said with unexpected insight. Everyone has experienced being sidelined in some context. Your response offered a template for reclaiming space with dignity rather than bitterness. Her perception surprised me. Karen, who had once managed family dynamics with rigid control, had developed remarkable emotional intelligence over the past 4 years, partly through her own journey after Daniel's retirement, partly through our evolving relationship as she embraced her role in the documentary project's expanding influence. I hope Tyler realizes how extraordinary this achievement is, she continued, gesturing toward the award certificate visible through the balcony doors. Not many people can say their grandmother revolutionized historical documentary perspective in her late 70s. The achievement belongs to all of us, I corrected gently. Tyler's vision, Melissa's marketing expertise, your community outreach initiatives, Daniel's legal guidance, the project succeeded through collaborative effort. Initiated by your refusal to remain invisible, Karen insisted. We should acknowledge that foundational truth. As our conversation concluded, I remained on the balcony briefly, reflecting on the extraordinary journey from wounded grandmother to documentary pioneer. The quantum shifts in family dynamics, professional identity, and cultural impact had all originated from that overheard comment about putting me in a corner. Tyler had intended those words as pragmatic problem-solving rather than deliberate cruelty. His casual dismissal had reflected broader cultural assumptions about aging, assumptions our documentary series had directly confronted and begun to transform. The following morning, our family gathered for breakfast before departing for our respective homes. PBS executives had scheduled a preliminary meeting to discuss the potential third season of Across Time, this iteration focusing on technological transformations witnessed by older Americans, from party line telephones to artificial intelligence. Before everyone scatters, I announced over coffee, I want to share a decision I've been considering. All attention turned toward me, expressions curious. I've decided to accept the third season offer, but with modified involvement. I'll continue as historical consultant and occasional on-camera contributor, but not as primary host. Concern flashed across several faces. Is this a health issue, Mom? Daniel asked immediately. Not at all, I assured him. Rather, it's about expanding our project's inclusivity. I've proposed that we incorporate diverse older voices more prominently, particularly those from communities whose historical perspectives have been systematically marginalized. Understanding dawned in Tyler's expression. You're suggesting we decenter your narrative to make space for others. Precisely, I confirmed. We've established a platform highlighting how older Americans' perspectives enhance historical understanding. Now we should expand whose perspectives are amplified. That's remarkably consistent with your entire message, Melissa observed, thoughtfully, using your platform to ensure others aren't relegated to corners. The conversation evolved into brainstorming potential contributors. A retired Tuskegee Airman Martha had met during our travels, a Japanese-American elder who had survived internment camps, a retired coal miner from Appalachia, whose family history paralleled America's energy evolution. As ideas flowed, I observed my family with quiet satisfaction. The grandson who had once thoughtlessly suggested hiding me in a corner now passionately advocated for centering marginalized historical voices. The daughter-in-law, who had agreed with that suggestion, now coordinated community screening initiatives, ensuring diverse audiences engaged with our material. My perfect response at the wedding had catalyzed transformations extending far beyond that single social occasion, reshaping family dynamics, professional identities, and cultural conversations about aging and historical perspective. Later, as we prepared to depart, little Evelyn climbed into my lap for a final cuddle before the journey home. Great-grandma, she asked with 3-year-old directness, why did Daddy want to put you in a corner? The adults froze, Tyler's expression mortified at his daughter's innocent reference to a story she'd clearly overheard fragments of. Because he didn't yet understand, I answered simply, meeting my grandson's gaze with affection rather than accusation. That corners are for furniture, not people, especially not people with stories to share. Tyler's relieved smile acknowledged both my graceful handling of the question and the profound truth of my response. In that moment, I understood that the most enduring aspect of my documentary legacy wouldn't be awards or academic recognition, but rather what it had taught my family, and perhaps viewers across America, about refusing invisibility at any age. The most perfect response to being cornered hadn't been just my wedding poem or the documentary series or even last night's acceptance speech. It was this ongoing commitment to ensuring that neither I nor others would be marginalized, a commitment now embedded in our family's values and professional endeavors. As we prepared to return to our respective homes, Daniel and Karen to their coastal cottage, Tyler and his family to their historic home renovation project, Martha and I to our adjacent condominiums in the senior living community we'd selected together, I recognized how thoroughly that single overheard comment about putting Grandma in a corner had redirected all our lives. The wounded grandmother who had left Tyler's kitchen clutching an undelivered cobbler had discovered capacities she'd never suspected, catalyzing family healing and cultural dialogue about aging in America. The perfect response, it turned out, wasn't a single moment of triumphant vindication, but rather an evolving commitment to claiming space, not just for myself, but for all voices society attempts to silence through invisibility or marginalization. Some corners, I reflected as we departed the hotel, are meant for quiet contemplation or temporary refuge. But none should ever become places where human beings are hidden away because their presence challenges others' comfort or convenience. That understanding, more than any award or recognition, represented the true gift that had emerged from that painful moment in Tyler's kitchen 4 years earlier when I'd overheard my grandson say, "Just put Grandma in the corner. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads."